All right, so now we're going to talk about how to make your own items and how to do it sanely and easily. So we're going to talk about the subtle difference between custom items and components. It's not a lot of difference there, but we'll see what they are. We're going to talk about how to define custom items and how to define components, which you've already seen, because we made components when we made delegates. They're basically dynamically instantiatable objects. We're going to talk about how to make your own properties, how to make your own interfaces to expose maybe some of your child's properties, doing signals and slots. We're going to be talking about taking your items and making a library out of them, and how you use versioning and namespacing to make your code sane. And namespacing actually works in reverse of C++. You specify the namespace in the import. We'll find out how that can be really useful. It keeps you from having namespace clashes. So custom items are defined in a separate file. There is one top-level item per file. We've already discovered that. It is used much in the same way as the standard items. And it has it can have, if built into a library, a version number. And we'll find out how that's really useful. Components are basically custom items you make inline. Basically, anything you wrap in a component item becomes a component. It doesn't need to be in its own file. It just so happens that anything that's a custom item is also a component. So here is an example of making a line edit. So here we are basically making a top-level item that can only be one per file, and it's a rectangle. And we're actually going to call this, I believe, line edit. So this is going to be in a file called lineedit.qml. And the item names are derived from their file names. So because we have a lineedit.qml that has this contents, we can use it in another QML file in the same directory just by saying, I want a rectangle, and in that I want a line edit. Which what really expands out to is this hunk of items. On top of that, my changes that I made in this specialization instance where I set these properties. Now, it is important to note that the top-level item name, you can consider this what you are subclassing. All of the properties of rectangle are going to be exposed by line edit. So somebody who is who makes an instance of line edit could change my border and my radius. That may or may not be something you want to expose. You could hide your item by making the top-level item simply item, and then having the rectangle be a child that fills the entire parent. And that way you would hide the rectangle. Yes?
How can it give the rectangle border? You said the rectangle border?
Yep.
With no ID there. How can it actually?
Because it is making the instance of it here. So when you make a line edit, just like when you make rectangle, you have access. Yeah, we just say border colon, right in line, like right here. So when designing this, you got to take certain design aspects of what you want to expose and what you want to hide. Because if users have access to it and it can break you, you might want to hide that. So you can think of the top-level item as to like what you're subclassing. So oftentimes, when you make your own components, you want to provide a set of properties. So you can define your properties like we've seen before with property, type name, property name, and a default value. And then the clients that actually make the line edit could change product, count, slope, condition, or address. So, and these can be anywhere. Usually you put them at the top of your file, but they could be anywhere, and you have property string text is going to be bound to the text input.text. All right? So anytime text input changes, the text property changes. However, there is a certain problem here in that your standard binding is one way. So when the text input text changes, if somebody from the outside says line edit dot text equals something else, then it actually doesn't update text input dot text. It is just resetting this binding. So what happens when you want a two-way association? Well, you can use something called a property alias, which is going to basically be a pass-through property, where we're saying property alias text is going to be bound to text input text. What this means is our external property called text is going to be a pass-through in two directions to the text input text. So this is a common mistake when you're trying to expose your child's properties. Yes?
Since you essentially create a label for that text input, the instantiation of, I forget which class it's going into, so instantiation would be able to edit the text input directly, or would they?
No, that ID is hidden. So you can't access, the IDs are only valid inside of your file. So if you make a line, oh, here we go. So we have a line edit here, okay? And inside the line edit, let's just say we have an ID on the text input called text input. You can't actually say here, text input dot text equals something. That is going to tell you that that's a not a valid object, because that is the scoping. You can't go upwards. You can only go down. Yes? Yes, we're going to find out later that you can separate them into these modules called imports. So instead of importing Qt-Quick 1.0, you could import mycomponents 1.0 or 1.1. And then in that case, you can manipulate what's called the QML import path. And you could have them looked up anywhere you want. But the trick for making these in the same directory is usually useful when you're making like an application full of dialogues. So you just throw them all in the same directory. You have the main application, use all the dialogues. You don't need to share that with other applications. So it turns out, some of you might be interested, I mentioned that you can't actually use, like, if you put an ID in here, you can't say, text input dot text. However, what you could do is you could add a property and say property type name is text input, and give it a name, and bind its value to the text input. That will basically expose your child as a member property. And that does work. So when you're making your properties, you can actually use any of the types. You can use rectangle, myLineEdit, or anything. And things that you export from Qt will show up as Qt object. So custom signals, you can implement, yes?
When you're creating JavaScript properties, is it possible to create a read-only property?
It is not. Sadly, unfortunately, it is not. If you export objects from C++, you can make them read-only by manipulating the syntax of the QProperty macro. Basically, you just give it a write and a notify signal. But alas, there is no read-only property. Sometimes I wish there was. You can implement signals by simply just using the signal keyword, the name, and optionally a signature, which will be the parameters that your signal emits. Now, anytime you have a signal, you also get an onSignalName function. So if you have a clicked signal, then anybody who makes an instance of you automatically can say onClicked : and put some JavaScript. So here's an example here of doing just that. So the mouse area has a signal called clicked. We've already seen this in action. And anybody who makes an instance of mouse area can just implement onClicked. You get that same exact functionality. When you make a property, the same paradigm works. There is also a connections item, which can be useful when you want to do signal and slot connections to just straight JavaScript without having to use the on signal notation. So anytime you want to emit a signal, basically you can go ahead and just call the function. Signals, just like in C++, are functions. When you want to emit them, emit them. One thing that you can do in C++ is you can emit somebody else's signals by calling the function. In C++, signals are protected functions. So you cannot, say parent checked. In QML, you do not have this protection, but it allows you to have much shorter, cleaner code because we have an item that has a signal called clicked. And our mouse area, when it's been clicked, we want to just send that out through the parent's interface. Because our item here, this is actually a new checkbox.qml. So this is a handy way to proxy out signals. Yes?
In the previous slide, you talked about a signal that the parameters are optional. Does that mean that the parameters are variant, or it means it has no parameters available?
No parameters. So you see this signal clicked here? And it has nothing after it? You can optionally put paren, or just leave it like that.
Okay. So is that, again, when you don't have parameters, that means you can't, there's no boolean sent, and you can't send a boolean.
Yeah. Yep. Like on the new checkbox, because we implemented the checked signal, then we automatically, whoever instantiates us has an onChecked handler.
Is it pretty typical in design components, similar to when you design widgets, that you will have multiple signals with different, so you have onChecked with nothing, and then onChecked with a state, and you might have other things with the same signal, and your component will look at all three, or the multiple signals?
Yeah, what I normally do in QML is you add as many parameters as you'd like. Then the slots can just ignore them. So when you say here onChecked, you'll notice that in the syntax it's a little unclear as to what's being passed, because there really isn't a signature. So it just so happens that if onChecked, it has a Boolean parameter, and it's actually called check value. You'll notice it here. It's just a magic variable. So you just have the one signal and let the client decide which attributes it wants to use and not use. So it's less restrictive than C++. You don't have to worry about dropping parameters left to right and all this other stuff. You can just have you can have 10 parameters, and if your clients use none of them, well, it's no skin off your back. Yeah, so the parameters show up as, well, magic variables.
So for instance, if you, rather than if you had a check, you just do, for example, whether it's turned on or off, you just wanted to do something on check, you just wouldn't use the check value variable.
Exactly. And one thing that like Creator helps at this is that the syntax doesn't have the signature in it. So you have to look in the documentation or even look in the QML files to find out exactly the objects you're using, what parameters they have. And syntax completion only gets you so far, because if you didn't know that check value started with check, you wouldn't get it from completion. There's also a new concept that showed up in this file, the import quote items. So this is a little bit of a forward declaration. I'm sure there'll be slides on this in a minute. But you can actually import by directory name. So if you had even a directory called / generic components, you could actually do an import of another directory, and then files in that directory and your directory are available as types. So that's a quick and dirty way of separating out some of your code. Yes? Yeah, you don't want them. So we're going to find out that the right way to do this is to actually make these component libraries that have versions and can be namespaced. So what we're going to end up with is like import items as these items, and then those namespaces will resolve the conflicts. But this is the quick and dirty way. Brings us to modules. Any questions on making your own items?
You call them items, but isn't all the documentation is like one component front end? I mean, you went through that a little bit, but the documentation, they're going to call it.
Yeah, there is a bit of a some nomenclature there, because like components are anything that's instantiable, but items have their own files. Yeah. Yeah. Because there's things you can do with items you can't do with components. I guess that is something that really does need to be cleaned up in the usage of names, especially when the Qt components are a collection of items.
So, speaking of in the documentation, I know that this is the Amazon line.
Mm-hmm.
Has anyone written anything that you would promote as a good hard copy document?
Good question. I heard rumors there was a book coming out, but I haven't seen it nor read it. It is a bit of alchemy right now, where searching mailing list archives is good for information, and the documentation, if you can find it. Basically, if you search the index, anything starting with QML space what you're looking for might yield what you're looking for, but I'm not aware of any like formal books or anything like that quite yet. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, there's always the whatever you're on in Creator and hitting the good old F1, and getting the help. But yeah, if you don't know what you're looking for, it's hard. Any other questions? Custom things? Okay. So let's talk about how to make your own modules. And modules are effectively libraries in the QML world. So you make a module that can be a collection of QML items. It could be a collection of QML items and some C++ items. And we'll see how they work. When it comes to the users of the modules are never really sure if their items are implemented as QML files or as C++. Just like you don't know whether the rectangle item is actually implemented in C++ or whether it is simply a derivative of some other item and is simply QML. So modules hold collections of, quote, elements. And they are made to encourage reuse. So if you make buttons and checkboxes and page stacks and things like that, you want to use them across projects. They worked well on this project. You want to make a different project that also uses buttons and checkboxes and page stacks. Then you should be able to abstract them out of your application, bundle them up, and then just use them in both places, just like you would with a shared library in C++. But the QML modules have explicit versioning. So like you import Qt Quick 1.0, when you import your module, you will also specify what version you want. So what happens is that you're going to do an import on a what ends up being a directory, and you're going to import all the modules in that directory. So, of course, we want to make our line edit an actual module. We don't want to just leave that in our current directory, and if someone else wants to use it, copy it into their current directory. We want to make a module out of this that we can install into maybe user local Trolltech Qt imports, and everybody will find it. Or maybe /opt my stuff /imports. So the quick and dirty thing I mentioned is to do, say, import quote items, and this imports just the directory. There's no versioning, there's no namespacing. And it can be a quick and dirty way to separate out your push buttons from your dialogues from your main Windows stuff. Generally used within one project simply to organize code. This is not how you would want to do things so that more than one application uses the code. What you really want is this concept of having the line edit module and having a 1.0 QML and this manifest called a QML dir. So basically, to make a module, you make a directory, which is going to be the module name. And then you need to have one or more QML files, and you are going to have a QML dir file. And the contents of the QML dir file is really short, or can be really short. And all it says for us is line edit 1.0 is line edit -1.0.qml. And this QML file, where it does say, like in the graphic 1.0.qml, that really should be line edit -1.0.qml. So this is going to allow you to specify different QML files for version 1, 1.1, 2.0, 3.2, and so on. So as the user requests different versions, you will serve them the functionality and behavior they want. You won't be stepping on anybody's toes, changing behavior between versions. So when you want to use a versioned module, this line edit directory needs to be inside of the QML import path, which you can set as an environment variable, or you can set it in code using a static method off of QApplication. You can append onto the search path. And you can then say import line edit 1.0. And you will have access to all of the items in the line edit package. It just so happens that the line edit package only has one QML file in it. But you can imagine this package being called my components and having a dozen or 24 QML files in it. So you can say line edit 1.0, then you have access to line edit. You can also now have protection against there being a behavioral change between, say, 1.0 and 1.1. So when you run your applications with the QML viewer runtime, you can actually use the -i for the import path to manipulate the import path using QML viewer. So here we say we want a versioned import path of wherever the line edit top level directory is. So you use -i and the QML import path environment variable to point to wherever the line edit directory is. So when you come out with your next version of your library, you can actually add to your manifest a separate file. So here we have line edit 1.1 and line edit 1.0, which actually point to different QML files. This is where the manifest is actually deciding what type name matches what file name. And you should implement them or declare them in decreasing version order. So namespaces. I mentioned namespaces work the opposite of C++. In C++, your libraries make up their own namespace, which could end up with namespace-namespace collisions. With Qt Quick, you import and then you set a namespace as an as namespace. So you decide the namespace. So you can actually import Qt Quick 1.0 as myQt. Then any item you want to use from Qt, you need to precede with the namespace myQt, say .rectangle, and myQt.text. Now, it is probably pretty rare that you're going to import Qt Quick 1.0 as myQt. But you might want to import your own components with your own namespaces to avoid clashes, like if you made your own rectangle, your own text, or your own line edit, and somebody else made their own line edit. So you can also do this with the pathing way of doing the imports, but it's not nearly as flexible as using the QML import path. Using the QML import path is also going to make it much easier to use C++, has the back end for your items. So before anybody starts a project and goes willy-nilly on just simply importing specific directories, try to go with the best. Does anybody have any questions? Yes? Yeah.
If you did happen across one of those where somebody else had implemented a line edit and you had as well, which one would win when they import? Do they conflict and throw an error, or does one of them take and one that doesn't?
It's a good question. I can't recall off the top of my head. I want to say it's a runtime error, but I can't be sure. I'm pretty sure it's going to get cannot instantiate whatever. When it tries to read the QML, I'm not quite sure, though. Oh, well, imagine I made the ICS components, and you wanted my pie chart, which is really what you want. And I was very loose in making my component. You can actually do subdirectories. So you have to do you could do the Java thing like com.ics.components.pychart if you wanted to. If I was really loose and I just said, oh, I'm just going to make my collection components, I'm going to have PyChart, line edit, and something else. But you don't want to use my line edit. You want to use yours because it looks like what you want, but you want my PyChart. You do import ICS components, you do import my components. Now it's going to say, uh-oh, I don't know how to make line edit because it's two different choices. Then you need to say import ICS components as ICS components. And you want to make a pie chart, you say ics.pychart. We're going to break, yep.
But can imports be determined at runtime? Meaning, could you have, say you had an option to user look this way or the old way, could you have an if statement around an import to say import this as opposed to another?
No, not that I'm aware of. That would be pretty trick, though. But yeah, not aware of such an option. You could. Well, because you're going to have one module that supports multiple different versions. So at runtime, unless you did two namespaces, you could. Because you could say, you could import both of them under different namespaces, and then maybe manipulate the namespaces so that, and sometimes you use one component and sometimes you use another. That's a good question.
How do you clean that up as part of your release? Just confusing for someone for.
Yeah. Pick one or the other. Yeah.
I'm actually thinking more of along the lines of a template.
Okay.
It's quite often, the user will want, expand it this way, to some, they may want different functionality, different rendering functionality, the same exact functionality, because some people like the, like the Zoom, the Android has the ability of how do you want to expand this smaller size, two different methods of doing it.
Yep.
Okay, I'm thinking something along those lines, you might say, stretch it to the right or stretch it based on the center. Right, along those lines, we might have different functionality of how it's, but then it could be when the OS updates, it goes away, but in that meantime, we fix it if we want to use it.
Yeah, well, that sounds to be like configuration of items, which you can do at runtime, just by having, you could export a variable from C++ to say, I want to do it this way, and then you just move your anchors around. But yeah, I don't know if that could be, if even that could be solved by importing one version of a library versus another.
Yeah, because a lot of times quite often the, QT Quick might come out with something in 1.1.
Yeah.
And you don't want to change everything to 1.1 because you don't trust the 1.1.0 waiting for 1.1.1.
Yeah. Yeah.
So some things work okay for you, you test them out.
Yeah, well, you could import via namespace.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, that would be the temporary fix. You could import both Qt Quick 1.0 and 1.1. All right, I got the signal that I think it's another break time. Yes, 15 minutes. So we'll be back at 4:30, and we will get on to the C++ integration, which I think everyone's here wants to know about.